Are there any ties between Mr. Trump, you or your campaign, and Putin and his regime?
No, there are not. It's absurd, and there's no basis to it.
I hear people saying it like it's a fact on television. That is just not only inaccurate and false, but it's dangerous.
Can you say with 100% confidence that Mr. Trump or anybody in his campaign had no conversations with anybody in Russia during the campaign?
No, I mean, I'm just telling you, it's all phony, baloney garbage.
Did any advisor or anybody in the Trump campaign have any contact with the Russians who were trying to meddle in the election?
Oh, of course not.
I have nothing to do with Russia. To the best of my knowledge, no person that I deal with does.
I think that Russia's involvement and activity has been investigated up and down. How many people have to say that there's nothing there before you realize there's nothing there?
I don't remember a lot of it, but I do remember saying I had gone to Russia with a church group in 1991, and he said he was not a believer himself, but he was glad to have church people come there. Indeed, I thought he was pretty much of an old-style Soviet-type ambassador. And so we talked about a little bit about terrorism, as I recall, and somehow the subject of the Ukraine came up. I had the Ukrainian ambassador in my office the day before, and to listen to him, nothing that Russia had done nothing that was wrong in any area, and everybody else was wrong with regard to the Ukraine. It got to be a little bit of a testy conversation at that point. Most of these ambassadors are pretty gossipy, and they liked, this was in the campaign season, but I don't recall any specific political discussions.
So if you're scoring at home, months of emphatic denials by the Trump campaign and administration officials concerning any contact with Russian officials during the campaign. Then Attorney General Jeff Sessions yesterday recalling some portions of his conversations with the Russian ambassador during the campaign, while other parts seem to remain hazy. This morning, some more revelations of other meetings between people in the Trump campaign and the Russian ambassador. NBC News has confirmed with the White House what the New York Times was first to report, that Michael Flynn and Jared Kushner participated in a previously undisclosed meeting with Ambassador Kislyak back in December of last year at Trump Tower. And then there's J.D. Gordon and Carter Page, who USA Today reports spoke to the ambassador on the sidelines of the Republican National Convention. And while it's not known what they discussed, it's not unusual for staff or advisors to meet diplomats at political conventions. It further contradicts the months of denials of meetings between campaign staff and the Russian government. We're back with political analyst John Heilman. Political analyst, is that your new title? I think there's so much more to you than political analyst.
Feel free.
NBC, no, you don't want me to say them on TV. NBC's Katie Tur with us as well, and joining the conversation, former Undersecretary of State for Public Diplomacy Rick Stengel, and Professor of Political Science and Director of the Institute for International Studies at Stanford University, former Ambassador to Russia, Michael McFaul. Good morning, all. Ambassador, let me start with you. You're uniquely qualified to talk about exactly everything that's been going on for the last 48 hours or so. Do you find it unusual? We could put the testimony of Jeff Sessions under oath to the side, but do you find it unusual at all that the Russian ambassador would seek a meeting with a member of the Armed Services Committee?
Do I find it unusual that he would seek a meeting
do you think
with
it's
a member?
Do you think it's strange they met?
So it's unusual to meet with a generic senator on that committee. But most certainly, it's not unusual for Ambassador Kislyak to try to meet with Senator Sessions, because as we all know at the time, Senator Sessions was a key close confidant of Donald Trump. And Sergey Kislyak, who I know very well, I've dealt with him for many years, he would have tried to get information to try to inform his government about a possible future Trump administration. That's exactly what he was doing.
And what do you think that meeting would have looked like? Obviously, you don't have details of how it was conducted, but you've been in the room with Kislyak. What would that meeting have looked like?
Well, exactly like Senator Sessions just said, finally, which is that, Ambassador Kislyak is going to want to know what his policy on Ukraine is. He's going to want to know, for instance, Donald Trump as a candidate said at one point he would look in to recognizing Crimea as part of the Russian Federation, Crimea that was annexed by Russia. I'm sure Ambassador Kislyak asked him, is that going to be your policy moving forward? And by the way, let's remember, back then, we didn't know which job Senator Sessions was going to have. Right. You know, at some point, he was talked about as being Secretary of Defense. So Mr. Kislyak, Ambassador Kislyak, was doing his job, trying to inform his government about a possible future administration.
Ambassador McFaul, it's John Heilman here. I have a question for you about the Ambassador Kislyak. There's a lot of stuff has been said over the course of the last 36 hours about whether or not he is a spy, whether he is friendly with spies, about his work in Washington to potentially recruit assets. What do you know about that?
What I know, I can't comment on. But I would just say a different thing. I think obviously I've been watching all this debate. It's a distinction without a meaning in the Russian system, which is to say, even in our system too, by the way. I worked 5 years in the U.S. government. I worked very closely with intelligence officials. Diplomats gather intelligence just like intelligence officers do. I think we're making too big of a deal about it to try to figure out if he worked for the KGB or SVR or FSB. He worked for the Russian government. He worked for Vladimir Putin. He was doing his job in gathering information, including meeting with the opposition. Now, for me, I got to tell you, it's a bit of a double standard here, because when I was ambassador, and if I dared meet with one member of the opposition, it would have been page one news. Right. But in our country, we allow that to happen, and that's what Kislyak was doing.
So NBC's producer in Moscow this morning has confirmed comments from Russia's foreign minister. Here's what it is. For the situation around Russian-American relations, and in particular the contacts that our ambassador was making and continues to make, I can say only one thing. Ambassadors are being appointed to maintain relations with the host country. I can't help but cite a quote published by the media today. All this looks very much like a witch hunt, or like the times of McCarthyism, which we believe were long over in the United States, a civilized country. Russia's foreign minister referring to President Trump's response to the Sessions recusal last night, in which Trump also called the entire story, quote, a total witch hunt. You're shaking your head.
Yeah, I'm shaking my head, Willie. I mean, I would always defer to Mike on this, because he has been my tutor on Russia, and his point about it's a distinction without a difference for the Russians. I mean, every ambassador everywhere engages in some kind of espionage, but the degree to which Russian ambassadors engage in it is much different than Western ambassadors or American ambassadors. That being said, he's not running Joes out of the Russian embassy. I mean, this is the kind of implication that people have, that he's actually, you know, on listening devices. He's a diplomat, and most of what he does is conventional diplomacy, but he is doing some little bit of espionage, more than what an American would ambassador do. But as Mike says, every ambassador has some aspect of what they do that involves espionage. The Russians just do it a lot more.
But Mike, talking about all of the coincidences and all of the times that this administration and the campaign, the transition is involved with this particular Russian ambassador, does all of it in total seem odd to you?
Yes, because we're leaving out one giant fact that we have to remember that was happening during this entire period, and that is Russian intelligence was stealing data from the DNC, publishing data from the DNC and John Podesta to influence our elections. Had that not been happening, this might seem a little more innocent, but that was happening in real time while all these meetings are going on. And let me just add one other thing. I worked on the Obama campaign. I worked on the Obama transition. I was the Russia guy during that time. And comparatively, just let me say for the record, we did not have all these kinds of meetings with Kislyak. Not during the campaign, not during the transition, and not during the conventions. You know, I don't remember our senior national security team sitting down with any ambassador, most certainly not Kislyak, during our convention in Denver.
So, Mike, I'm going to ask you a question, but it's really a statement posing as a question. So, basically, as you suggest, this is a cyber attack on the United States and on the United States sovereignty. Why wouldn't we invoke Article 5 of the NATO agreement that this was a cyber attack on the United States and we want the aid of all the other countries in NATO? And why wouldn't Mrs. Merkel do that in Germany, where Russia is now attacking them, and that is ground zero for fake news, and they are trying to disrupt the German election?
Well, the Obama administration clearly did not want to frame it as an attack during the campaign. And most certainly, people in the Clinton campaign are very upset about that fact. Second, the idea of a cyber attack being an Article 5 commitment of NATO is still rather ambiguous. Ask the Estonians. They were attacked in 2007, and when they tried to frame it that way, NATO decided that they did not want to go to war with Russia over a cyber attack. But make no mistake, we really haven't figured out the rules of the road here. We haven't figured out what to do forward. And most certainly, we have done nothing to prepare us to be more prepared for the next electoral cycle. I hope that someday we'll get to that part of the policy debate.
So just driving right straight out of that answer, Rick, I'll ask you this question. You were in the State Department while this was all going on. There's a reporting in the New Yorker this week on this epic piece they've done on the new Cold War that suggests that your boss, John Kerry, while this was happening, was beating on the president's door and saying, we need right now, we need a 9/11 style commission. While this election is going on, we need to invoke it right now. We need to call these people together and investigate this thing in a serious way. First of all, talk about the deliberations within the State Department that led Kerry to make that request and what happened on the other end of the phone, President Obama's end of the phone, when he did.
I don't know about the other end of the phone, but I can confirm, John, that the Secretary did indeed make that request. It was a memo from the policy planning staff of the State Department to the NSC to say, we need an independent 9/11 style commission. Now, the other thing that's, I think the New Yorker piece also touches on is that the State Department itself was invaded by cyber attacks by Russia and breached by cyber attacks by Russia. One of the things that we learned is that the State Department itself was under attack by many sources, 200,000 or 300,000 attacks a day on the State Department system. And the Russians are the most sophisticated of this. They did breach, I believe, the State Department at certain points. And this is, again, go back to the conversation with Mike. I would argue that Article 5 needs to be rewritten to include cyber attacks. This is a, as I saw Angus King say this morning, if the Russians came in with parachuters and came in and went to the DNC and stole, hard drives, we would think that was an attack. That's essentially what they did.
Ambassador McFaul, before I let you go, just put a bow on this for us. There's a lot of smoke. There are a lot of suspicious meetings. Do you suspect now, based on everything you know, all the information you've been able to gather, that there was some kind of collusion between the Russian government and the Trump campaign?
I don't know. And I'm not prepared to speculate about that. But that's exactly what we need to know. At the end of the day, what the business ties were, what they did when they went to Miss Universe, all that, I think, is peripheral. Your question is central. And I'm convinced that the only way we're going to get a real answer to that is if we do have an independent commission, that we can have these leakers become witnesses and finally know the truth.
Ambassador Michael McFaul, former U.S. Ambassador to Russia, thanks so much for your time this morning. And as always, let's turn to business.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.